working on that quickly. So what I'm going to do for you now is basically expand a little bit on the slide we've got on the webpage we've got on our website, which explains, it has 10 easy steps. Jack, if you could jump on a couple of slides. And I'm just going to kind of run through these, just expand them a little bit. And it's really, this is a getting started session. So as Sue says, hopefully it's not too simple for people. It's not too much at the starting point, but obviously churches are at different places, and we're going to run through a few more webinars where we're going to get a bit more into the technical detail of perhaps heat pumps and solar panels and different kinds of things like that. So next slide, thank you. The starting point, and we've been badgering, certainly in Diocese of London, been asking everybody for their to complete their energy footprint tool, and it's been incredibly, we've had a really great response. It's really great. We're over 70% response, and it's still not too late for people to submit their data. You can't submit it via the website, but you can send it to us, and actually Jack will submit that on your behalf. And we've really got a great response rate. We've gone up from something around 50 to over 70% this year, so that's really great. But that's the sort of starting point. It's your basic understanding of the carbon footprint of the church, and also it's a good memory jog of the cost of how much of your bills are costing you. The next point is really, I want to signpost you to the Practical Guide to Net Zero Carbon. Now, this has been around for a little while, but it's been recently refreshed on the National Church website. We'll be sending you links to this. And actually, I think it's a really useful document. It's really nicely presented now, and there's a little video that comes with this as well. So if you wanted to hold a session or show people on your PCC, or perhaps your kind of building group or your eco group, this is really a great document for that. And next slide, it basically runs through 4 easy steps. And so we're going to talk really about the getting started points, but maybe some of the next steps, the bigger steps. And then going further is really when you're doing major building works, that's when you might think of larger projects as part of other work. An example of that might be solar panels on a roof if you're re-roofing the roof. And so I'm going to dive straight onto the quick wins. So these are really great starting points. And if you're keeping your church dry and avoiding damp, then it will be easier to heat and it will be more comfortable. A damp wall conducts more heat than a dry wall, and obviously incoming water will cause damage as well to your surfaces and your building, and will distract you, mean you have to spend money on repairing rather than moving forward. Insulating your pipes and your pumps and your valves is a very important way of avoiding a lot of heat loss. Can be done quite cheaply and can be really cost effective. I've been in one boiler room recently. It was so hot, and it's incredible how much a poorly insulated boiler room can be, how much heat it can be losing and wasting. Think of maybe 5% of the total running cost of your boiler could be lost in unwanted heat loss. Of course, fixing any broken windows, fixing any leaks, it's sort of airtightness, draft leaks around your windows is really important, and draft proofing your doors. And what I always say to people is that think about thermal comfort. It's not just about air temperature, it's about air movement. And if you've got a cold draft blowing in through a door, as we all know, that can be really uncomfortable. So you can make some quite big differences by just stopping large air movements in your church, by making sure the windows and the doors and any other gaps, vents, etc., are well sealed up. Be careful about over sealing your church, but I think for most churches they're generally quite permeable to air, and the chances of making it very airtight and causing damp problems are relatively low. The next slide. These are some of the more kind of perhaps more technical things you might think of, which is better controls for your lights and your heating, replacing your lighting, inefficient light bulbs and floods with LEDs. That's a really good measure that you can just work around the church. Sometimes some areas will be easy to do, others will be a little bit harder. So kind of developing a program for this is a really good idea. Getting good control of your heating system, understanding what it's doing, understanding the temperature and the times you're setting for you to heat up the church is really important. And increasing number of churches are using smart controllers, which allow a number of different people to operate the heating so that it's not reliant on just perhaps one person. Also, you can get like a boost button for the church or for your hall, which is just easy for anybody to use. Push the button, they get 1 more hour heating, and you're not worried about overheating a space, but you give people in the church opportunity to make themselves more comfortable. Heated cushions for pews is also identified on this list from the quick guide to net zero carbon practical guide. And it is a kind of short-term way you can provide improved comfort without a large outlay, and it's identified as a good opportunity. So next slide, thanks, Jack. The practical guide to net zero carbon has a really good checklist in it, and I would recommend that you, if you can, that you use this ideally in a group. Talk about these issues as part of your building group, or maybe a subset of the PCC, and see if you can make progress across the board on these different steps all the way through. The next point the next sort of task that you might decide to undertake is an energy. Sorry, next slide. Thanks, Jack. Is an energy and net zero carbon audit for your church. Now, this is a bit more technical, and it will assess your energy costs, your energy use, and the carbon emissions. And it's a bit more of a technical document. You'll have an auditor come for 2 or 3 hours, and we'll study the church, understand the church better and how you use it, and give you recommendations for improvement and a long-term path to net zero carbon. But part of that will be more detail on the easy wins or the quick wins, which, as I've said, LED lighting, air tightness controls, secondary glazing, or efficient equipment. And that's also, it will help you if you maybe struggle to get through those quick wins. Then an audit will be very useful to take you to the next stage. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about heating. So it may be that the option for your heating is quite clear, or it may be that you're looking for still further advice. So you can get a heating options appraisal, which will compare specifically perhaps 1 or perhaps 2 or 3 different heating options to get you closer to understanding the cost implications and the changes you might need to make to the church. So that would be a next step of following your audit. And so I'm going to move now really to what this might look like for your church in the long term. You get together, you work with and develop a plan. Look at your building fabric, you consider your heating, your lighting, and your power use. And then finally, as you've reduced your carbon emissions, you think about green energy and whether that is the purchase of green energy, and you're going to hear a lot more about that in the coming weeks from the National Church, or whether that might possibly be the generation of green energy on your buildings. That would be the two ways you could go there. And last couple of slides to wind up on. I don't know if you knew that today was National Test Your Boiler Day. 14th of July is the day to go down to your boiler room and check your boiler and see if it's working. It's really important that in the summer we're not in a dire situation where we need heating, that we check our boilers and we get them working and make sure they're working and carry out any servicing that might be required. Yes, I think that's it. Maybe one more slide. And I'm handing over to Luke, or Vice Luke.
Thank you, Jonathan. Before we go on to Luke, so that has given you an overview of what is possible, what you can begin to start doing. Now we're going to hear from a couple of churches who have started to make that progress. I understand we've got Joy Hinson on the line, if you can unmute to put your camera on, from St Luke's, West Holloway, and Tiff Ewan from Wandsworth Common.
I'm here.
Hi Tiff, great.
Hi there.
Yes. Do you want to start? So we've got about 5 minutes just to hear what have you done in your church, and talk us through it and share your story. That'd be great.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Reverend Tiff Ewins. I'm the vicar of St Michael's, Wandsworth Common, and I'm here with my colleague Sarah Taylor, who is the parish projects manager at St Michael's, Wandsworth Common. I'm going to speak for 2.5 minutes, and Sarah will speak for 2.5 minutes. So I'm setting my timer, and we're on. I think the thing that I would like to say is that this all comes from discipleship. This all comes from our understanding of what it is to follow Jesus Christ as our Lord and Saviour in the world today. The idea of creation care is not separate from being disciples of Jesus. And so where we started really was having values which the congregation began to really accept as normal, that if we're disciples of Jesus Christ, we care about racial justice, we care about equality for women and men, for the youngest and the oldest, and all of those things are connected to a care for climate justice. We're called to love our neighbours. That means our near neighbours, and it matters what emissions we're pumping out from boilers into our local area. Locally in Wandsworth, we have a big problem with air pollution, but it also matters we have a diocesan link, for example, with Metabeleland in Zimbabwe. It really matters to our neighbours further away as well. That the choices that we make are discipleship choices first and foremost. So I think that's what I want to say where it starts for us. In the context of that, we have we make sure that our worship represents our care for creation. We make sure that our prayer includes prayer for those at the sharp end of climate change. We make sure that we talk about climate justice. We're active as an eco-church. We attend events and talk about those events. And one of the things that we've done is think about also how we can not just bring our own building to net zero, but the influence that we have on homes and families in our area. So that is a priority to us as well. I'm going to hand over to Sarah, who's going to tell you in practical terms what that position in terms of worship and prayer and discipleship has led us to as a church.
Thank you, Tiff. Good morning, everyone. Actually, good afternoon. My apologies. So we start with the simple stuff. A lot has been pointed out so far. Things like LED lights, changing light bulbs to LED. We have not had a problem with any of that. We simply take out the old bulb and put an LED bulb in instead. And largely speaking, that works. It doesn't need to require a whole new lighting system in order to do that. So that has been the easy win, I would suggest. We have ensured that we are always on a green tariff for our electricity supply, so that we know that any electricity we're using is net zero, carbon zero. We then we were actually forced to change our gas boiler in our church. In the church building, we have a church building and we have a halls building attached to each other, but the main church gas boiler was in the region of about 40 years old and was slowly but surely degrading and breaking. So we were forced to have to deal with that issue, and we were absolutely determined not to put another gas boiler in. So we had to think very clearly about what heating would work in our church. And I think that's a crucial point to note, that all of our buildings are different, and we have different areas around those buildings. We have churchyards or we don't have churchyards. We have a very straight, you must think very clearly about what will work for your building. And in our investigations and in our research, we discovered that something like an air source heat pump was not going to work for us. We didn't have the space to put it in, and we didn't have the finance to put it in. So we came across something called Church Ecomiser, which is an electric radiator specifically designed radiators, specifically designed for churches. And we installed that. The thing to note about that is that you do need to have sufficient electricity coming into your building. So if you don't already have a 3-phase supply, you would need to get that put in. But we have now got a very efficient electricity system in the main church, running our church, which heats up well and is controlled on an app. Have I got 1 second left?
Yeah, go ahead.
So we are now, the other thing to note is the energy footprint tool is extremely useful, and that has given us an indication of where we need to work next on improving the building. So that's shifted our emphasis now onto the halls building, and we're looking at how to, again, we've got a gas boiler in there, 2 gas boilers in there, one of which is on its last legs. So we need to think clearly about how we then heat that building without replacing it with another gas boiler. And the only other thing to say is that we are working on our porch entrance into the church, which again was leaking lots of cold air and warm air in and out, and not efficient in any way. And we're working on installing glass doors, and have had to think very clearly about how they fit into the porch so that they are as economical and environmentally friendly as possible.
And just to nick a tiny bit, as we are in a heat wave, the other thing that's come to light as we've been doing work on our halls is climate resilience generally. How are we going to keep spaces cool in summer as well as warm in winter? So any project that we're engaged with now, that we're asking both questions at the same time, and we're looking at the moment this technology called destratification fans, which push the warm air down in winter so that your heat is at its most efficient in winter, and enable the warm air to be withdrawn, if you like, in summer, so enable it to be cool. So destratification fans, well worth having a look at. But the main question there is about climate resilience. How are you going to be warm in winter and cool in summer without busting your bank account? If you have answers, do send them to us.
Thank you so much, and we can explore more of that in the Q&A at the end. That's really helpful. You sort of touched on the heating as well as energy providers, LEDs and draft proofing, and I think really importantly the sort of principles and the drivers of like, why do you do this and why do you keep going and making all the effort that you have done. It's fantastic. And we hope that you'll be around at the end to answer any questions that other churches may have. Joy Hinson from St Luke's, West Holloway. Hello.
Good afternoon.
Wonderful. Thank you. 5 minutes. We'd love to hear what your church did to get started.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I won't repeat what Tiff and Sarah said, as they put it so eloquently, the theological reasons for doing this. At St Luke's West Holloway, we've been part of the Greenbelt movement, and so have had an environmental focus for really quite a number of years. I think the thing that has most helped us really get started was the eco-church system, which we joined in 2018. We have a local charity that supports churches in Islington who paid for a sustainability audit for us. But that's very similar to the energy and net zero audit that Jonathan was talking about. It's really worth getting that done and helping you identify quick wins. And we use the eco-church questionnaire really as a checklist for all of the things that we could be thinking about. We started with the really easy wins: secondary glazing, draft proofing, our very leaky doors. We've got a big old Victorian church building, and it was cold in winter. We had a heating system that you turned on for the hour before church started, and it was never quite warm enough when church started, and it was pretty hot by the time services had ended. We we replaced our heating controller with the sort of multi-user unit that Jonathan was talking about, so that we could remotely control the heating. And when we refurbished the building, nearly 20 years ago now, we installed underfloor heating with good insulation, which allowed us to then switch to a low carbon form of heating last year. Because we have the philosophy that everything we do is going to be as environmentally sustainable as possible, we do that simple, replacing all our light bulbs with LED bulbs. We've switched to a completely LED system, but using the same wiring that we had before. When our south roof developed a series of leaks and needed replacing, we took the opportunity to add an additional layer of insulation using sheep's wool, a sustainable insulating material. So it's having that heart for always doing things in the most sustainable way and taking your opportunities as they come. We've still got a couple of wretched old gas heaters in our side hall, which is a part of our big leaky Victorian church. And we've decided as a PCC that when they break, which they're really on the verge of doing, we're going to replace them with electric heat pumps, which can also have a cool, which can be reversed and have a cooling effect as well. So we've taken that decision in principle in advance of it needing to happen. I think that's all I wanted to say. It's a little bit less than 5 minutes, but I'm very happy to take questions.
Thank you, Joy. And I think your last point was a really useful one of making those decisions ahead of time, because there can be a big panic, and if your heater breaks down in the middle of winter, so planning ahead for the steps you're going to take and discussing it as a PCC in advance and speaking to your diocese as well is really key. Upon which we're now going to bring in Luke Tatum from Diocese of Southwark. He's the DAC secretary. So that's where he's going to talk us through the types of approvals that might be needed for different net zero carbon installations that you might do. Just give us an overview of that and touch on fundraising as well. So if we can have Luke spotlight and his slides up. Luke, are you able to unmute?
Yeah, great.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Sue. So I'm just going to talk in this slot about permissions, and actually what I'm particularly focusing on here is aligning with the sorts of steps that have been talked about under quick wins. Jonathan earlier was talking about that practical guide which has a pathway and where you start, and this webinar is about focusing on getting started, getting underway, rather than necessarily some of the bigger projects further down the line. So I want to have a look at some of the things that either don't need permission or don't need full faculty applications. And Jack, if you could just go on to the next slide, which covers for us just a really basic overview, particularly for those of you on the call who are church wardens or clergy and who have to be aware of the faculty rules for all kinds of things affecting church buildings, not just works for net zero reasons. We have these two national lists passed by General Synod, and List A is the minor matters list of works, doesn't require permission, doesn't require consultation, you can just get on with it. And it's been around for 10 years now, but it was last updated in 2022 so that it aligned better with the sorts of straightforward actions that were being encouraged under the net zero programme and to work towards the target. And also 10 years ago, a new type of permission was introduced in the system, which made it easier than a faculty application, which involved consultation with the DAC and then then the Archdeacon would give written notice to approve some of these works, and many of the works on List B did previously need a faculty, and that was part of General Synod trying to make the faculty rules simpler in general terms. But then in 2022, the lists of works were specifically tailored and tweaked to make them align better with the sorts of behaviours and actions that would be encouraged for net zero reasons. The next slide just briefly confirms about List A. You can go ahead without diocesan permission, but the lists will always have a column on the right-hand side which just confirms some of the safeguards that you may need to pay attention to. For example, if you're doing any electrical repairs, that you're using an accredited or suitably registered electrician, and there are some categories, for example, where the PCC's insurers should be notified, for example, if external scaffolding were to be erected. But that's the category of things that don't need permission. The next slide summarises List B, which is permission that comes from the Archdeacon, but the DAC is consulted, and so there's a short process, but the faculty application, the form, the public notice, the involvement of the diocesan registrar and the chancellor, all of that process is avoided for these straightforward List B requests. And again, they might have specified conditions which are just sort of safeguards or caveats that say, yes, you can do it, but you need to do it in this particular way, or pay attention to this. Then you can apply for that under List B. Just to sort of give you a few visual examples, we've got a slide showing some of the heating controls, under pew heaters, changing of light fittings and so on, which in 2022 things were made easier than they were before in terms of whether or not you needed permission, and there had to be some appropriate safeguards put in place, especially when we're dealing with heritage matters, when we're dealing with listed buildings. But there were a number of categories of works that Synod and those putting forward the changes was keen to make sure that there was between taking action, getting things done for net zero reason, and paying attention to due safeguards and the reasons why the permissions process is in place. And the full lists are quite long, and they're sort of grouped into things like the church building, the churchyard, the church contents, church halls, and so I'm not running through all of them, but what I want to do is give you a flavour of some of the straightforward things, and we can follow up with information about the full lists, but I'm just flagging up a few of the things that are easier to do now. And for example, some of the things aligning with quick wins, these new additions that draft proofing doors and windows are on List A, no permission needed. That's really just to help you tackle that really important and beneficial quick win. And similarly, as been mentioned earlier, making sure that the pipe work distributing heat around the building is insulated and not leaking heat. And then switching lighting to new LED fittings. So these are the actual fittings rather than just changing the bulbs. And pew heaters. These are electrical works which have to be on List B so that there is enough scrutiny and oversight, but they are very good in principle to be looking at as options depending on the factors of your building, and considering them as possible steps towards net zero, and helping switch to electric heating, switch to lower, less energy intensive lighting towards net zero. A couple of things we're looking at to help with soft furnishings, which generally it's more of an issue about disposing of things like hassocks and so on, but there was already a condition there. It's just been tweaked to clarify that you can introduce these things, because these are behavioural things really. They're not big changes to the building, but actually if you make people feel warmer, then the overall output of your heating system may not need to be as much. It's a balance of factors, comfort, ventilation, the heating itself, and that kind of all comes together as a series of factors that you have to balance up. But certainly these sort of portable furnishings and bits of carpet can help people feel more comfortable where they are, rather than just heating a whole building needlessly. And then another example that we're just going to look at next is has been mentioned before. The electrical supply is often a very important part of getting to net zero, because church electrical systems have often only had to power the lights and maybe some other pieces of equipment that need power, but not the heating up till now. So you often have to consider whether you're going to need to upgrade your electrical supply, and so digging a cable trench was put onto List B, and one of the reasons why there is still oversight is because that does potentially have archaeological issues, and so there are special safeguards, and on a case-by-case basis the DAC advice would help you with that. But in principle, digging a trench that's done in the right way and for the right reasons to help with the electrical supply upgrade is something that was made easier to help churches on their net zero journey. That's been talking a bit about sort of electrics and heating and things like that, but the next example is about insulation and how important it is not just to think about what's consuming electricity, but what the demand is and whether you can improve the building itself to reduce the demand. So if you can increase the insulation, whether you're doing roof replacements, as one example that's on the lists, there's a requirement to consider insulation and include it in re-roofing of unlisted buildings on List B, but it's about using that opportunity of replacing your roof or doing a recovering of maybe just an aisle roof or a vestry roof, phasing it into the works that you need to do to your building anyway. And then a couple of other sort of technological things again. I won't read through all the examples here, but there were a few different places where electric vehicle charging was added. One of the things to mention here, and also about solar panels, is that some of the works, if they're outside of the building, you may also need to get local authority planning permission, and so this was aligned with what the planning rules would allow or what would need permission. And similarly, we also now have it easier for unlisted churches to put solar panel array on the roof, and that, along with the electric vehicle charging, would potentially require planning permission, so you have to check the rules, and it's only for unlisted churches not in a conservation area, because again that needs to align with what the planning system would allow or not. But just to wrap up a few of the heating options that are on List A and B on the next slide. Thank you, Jack. Pew heating is definitely being encouraged as a low intervention, relatively straightforward way to heat the people by keeping them warm in the areas where they congregate. Obviously, it only applies to churches with fixed pews or fixed stall seating or whatever. But another one that was put in to make it easier in the future is if you've got an electric boiler and you're replacing it with an electric boiler, in the future that will be a straightforward swap that doesn't need permission, but the rules were incentivized against just going for a like-for-like gas, so that it was made harder to install a new gas boiler in the latest set of rules that we're looking at. So that would require a faculty. And then just touching on that, we're going to we've got plans to do webinars subsequently on more in-depth topics. So this is just an overview, but it is really important to flag up at this point when you're looking at things that are List B or faculty matters, those types of work to your building, or even if you just need some guidance on List A. Your archdeacon and the diocesan staff are there to help suggest what technical input you need, help to access DAC advice, and also to learn from churches elsewhere. The National Church are doing a good job of championing case studies across the country of either more sort of innovative technologies or just kind of churches following the guidance and going step by step to do kind of straightforward things, but to inspire others. And similarly, I know in both dioceses we're doing that and wanting to do more of that as well, because that's how it helps people to learn from each other. And I'm just then going to give a couple of minutes finally on fundraising, because again that is important to come back to in the context context of particular projects, because there is no sort of no single one large pot of money waiting to pay for all net zero works for all churches, no matter what they may be. But this slide is just highlighting that the National Church of England has put together a good sort of how to start web page with some pointers on where you might look for funding. The next slide I've put together just a sort of a visual really of a few of the funders where net zero funding might come from, both national organisations and for the region. So Jack, if you can just show the various funders there. We've got a couple of London-based funders there, but national organisations like the Benefact Trust, Garfield Weston, National Lottery Community Fund. These are not necessarily going to be funders entirely or even primarily for environmental or net zero reasons, but they are wanting to help churches, heritage buildings, community buildings, and recognising that net zero works are an increasingly important part of what people caring for these buildings need to be tackling, and often also that projects will fulfil more than one goal. There will be good missional reasons for doing a project, and then also being able to get money for the net zero thing on the side as well. There are some funds from the net zero programme that have been allocated and are being allocated on a 3-year cycle, but not everybody fits into these, because these are generally small streams for sort of more experimental works, or just small interventions rather than big projects. But in our respective dioceses, we're very happy to answer questions from parishes about what funding is going to be available as far as we know, and what there might still be around this year, or what opportunities there have been. And then going to just leave you with one final fundraising tip really, which is not always easy to do in practice, but is really important to remember, which is that a lot of the fundraising for net zero will come from local sources. And even though we know that local authorities are very stretched in terms of their budgets, one of the things that they do is they distribute money for net zero reasons from sort of ring-fenced schemes of things that national government or other funders might have allocated. So even if you don't think your council has got spare money for net zero, that may not be the full picture, because actually there will be opportunities in different boroughs and at different times of year, and other funders that focus on a borough or just a local or a postcode or part of the city or part of an area, or out into the counties. Certainly for our diocese in South London, that includes half of Surrey as well, sort of Surrey funders. So we are, and also some of those just general community funds that, as I say, want to champion environmental projects. So I'll just leave you with that thought that actually you may not be looking too far, and it won't necessarily be easy, and these won't be giant sums of money, but as we've said, the message of today's webinar really is that starting with easy quick wins will get you a good way along your net zero journey, and that's the place to start. So thanks for listening to my slot, and we're going to hand back to Sue now for the next part of the webinar.
Thank you, Luke. There's lots to cover there, and we'll share the slides afterwards as well. So for the final 15-20 minutes, Jonathan Walter, my counterpart in Southwark Diocese, is just going to take any questions that you've got, and we can field it amongst all the staff that we've got here. We've got DEOs, Diocesan Environment Officers from both, and sort of net zero staff from both dioceses as well.